In this video, we are going to discuss case management rules for UNHCR and partners. The objectives of the session are to review the steps of case management and best interest procedures, to discuss how this differs in refugee contexts versus others, and to understand UNHCR's role in case management and best interest procedures. To begin with, we need to understand what we mean by case management is when we're discussing gender-based violence in child protection cases. And what we're referring to is the structured method for providing help to a person of concern. So case management makes sure that issues and problems facing a child or a survivor and his or her family are identified, persons of concern are informed of all of their options available to them, and that a child or a survivor's needs are followed up in a coordinated way. Individuals are provided with emotional support throughout the process as well. So usually what happens is an individual will seek services through the variety of different service providers. And the idea is that there needs to be some sort of continuity throughout this process so that an individual is aware of all the different services available, no matter where they first go to, that they are able to have someone guide them through this process, and that person who's guiding them through the process of seeking services that they want and understanding the services that are available can also then provide them with emotional support. In most contexts, there's one organization that is designated to be the case management service provider, and they tend to be the same service provider who provides psychosocial support or social services or is a social services actor. Another thing that's important to note is that we will use the term best interest procedures or BIP when we are referring to specifically UNHCR's internal child protection case management procedures. So we use the term child protection case management for general case management procedures that are not specific to what we as UNHCR utilize within our own programming. When we speak about GBV and child protection case management in general, we speak of 6 steps. So step 1 being introduction or identification, depending upon if you're working with a child protection or a GBV service provider, and engagement. Step 2 is assessment. Step 3, case action planning. Step 4, action plan implementation. Step 5, case follow-up. And step 6, case closure. So this is from the beginning of when someone seeks services, when it's identified that the case management will end due to either all the needs being met, all the available services being provided, or other case closure criteria such as disappearance from services or death or something like that. But this process is followed through usually with one caseworker with whoever the individual person of concern is, a child or a survivor. Now, where we oftentimes get into some confusion, both internally with our colleagues and externally with other actors, is that we also use the term case management for a different purpose. So what we've just reviewed here, the step 1 through 6 and the overall purpose, giving this continuity of care, is specifically for gender-based violence and child protection case management. But because we are UNHCR and with our specific mandate for refugee protection, we also do a different type of case management, and that is refugee case management. And this is made up of a broader set of services that take place from the moment a person is displaced and seeks asylum until that durable solution is able to be identified. So oftentimes you'll hear UNHCR talk about case management, and this is the refugee case management. It's that bigger picture. And so if you look at this image here, what you see is that there's all of these other services that we provide as UNHCR, such as refugee registration, refugee status determination, and then there's a specific case management within that, which is what we had just discussed, which is the gender-based violence case management or child protection best interest procedures. and then durable solutions as well. So what can be confusing for people is that when we talk about gender-based violence case management or child protection best interest procedures, that is a specific type of case management within this broader refugee case management. So you can have, from the time a person is displaced, they then move into the camp, they stay, and then something happens, right? An incident or a change in needs, and then that person will seek specific services for gender-based violence or child protection. And within their broader needs as a refugee, they then will have a discrete period of time when they're undergoing child protection best interest procedures or gender-based violence case management to then identify those needs, help them receive the services they need, resolve those issues, and then that case management would conclude, but they would then still continue to be under our refugee case management until a durable solution has been found. And so it's very clear for us to be able to clearly communicate these different case management responsibilities and what information is needed for these different responsibilities, because this can often get confused internally and externally, and it can cause some issues in terms of identifying what are our information management needs with regards to case management, because obviously if we are talking about two different types of case management, it can require two different types of information needs. So what we need to consider when we're thinking about this is who is responsible for what of the different steps. So obviously as UNHCR, right, we have a specific mandate and responsibility for the protection of refugees. Thus, we take a front position in terms of a lot of those responsibilities for, let's say, refugee status determination or for registration. But we also, in some contexts, don't take necessarily the direct service provision role when it comes to things like gender-based violence prevention and response. And so it's important for us to consider who is actually taking responsibility for these different steps in and different responsibilities in both the refugee case management as well as the gender-based violence case management or the child protection best interest procedures. And we need to think about where we are directly engaged and how. And in what capacity? Because again, this is going to determine for us what will be our information needs. Now, I'm going to explain this a little bit more just to try to clarify to you what I mean by this. So if you were to make a graph where on one axis, the x-axis on the bottom, you have the proximity to the case. And here I'm specifically talking about proximity to the child protection or the gender-based violence case. So that meaning how directly related or involved am I in that case? Am I sitting across from that survivor or that child, providing them that direct service provision? Or am I just aware of that these problems are happening in a camp? And on the y-axis, we're going to have the accountability of quality. Obviously, we are always accountable to our affected persons. That's no doubt. But we, depending upon certain contexts and certain roles, have higher levels of accountability than we do in other situations. And so the accountability of quality, so from low, meaning that we are obviously responsible for the programming that we do, but not much beyond that scope, versus we have our mandate to be in charge of all protection-related issues in a refugee context. That would be up at the higher end of this. So if I was to look at a graph like this, then what you would see is we can place different responsibilities on this graph. So something like an ombudsman is quite far removed from the individual cases, and it also does not have that accountability in terms of being responsible for the quality of overall protection, programming, and that sort of stuff. So that's why you see this in this far left corner, this bottom left corner, right? So it's not really particularly close to each individual case, and it's not really high, it does not have a high level of accountability for the quality of those programming. Now, if I was to go up from that to the upper left-hand quadrant, that's where you might see something more like case management oversight. Okay, so what we're seeing is that if we are overseeing or funding the provision of services of case management, we obviously have a high accountability of the quality of that. That's important for us to ensure that what is being put into place is of a high quality. So that's why we have that high up on the accountability of quality. But if we're just providing oversight, we're not going to be doing that in your face direct service provision that is hands-on with a person of concern, such as a child or a survivor. Thus, we're further down or lower on that proximity scale. So you're just doing more of the oversight, the higher level, and not really that direct implementation. Whereas if you were to look at the upper right hand corner, this is the top of the most of the accountability and of the proximity. So what we're seeing here is that both you are doing that direct service provision, you're directly engaging with a survivor or a child, and at the same time with that has a huge amount of accountability in terms of ensuring that quality of that service is high. And in the bottom right-hand corner, what we have is the inverse of that case management oversight, which is these other protection services that we provide, where it's not necessary that you have all of the information about all of the cases across the board, because you don't have necessarily the accountability of the quality of the case management, because we're talking about other protection services. What we really have, though, is that you are directly engaged with specific cases for case management. And so what you need in that case is that you're going to be on this higher end of, I need to know information to be able to provide these services, but perhaps I don't need to know the information of everybody, because my job here isn't as much of oversight as actually the direct provision of service. So what you can see when these are just kind of general themes about our work, but the more you go up and to the right, the more information that is necessary. And the further that you are to the bottom and to the left, the less information that is necessary. And these types of information aren't the same. So as I said, the things that are more to the right are more around direct service provision, requiring you then to have more information that is specific to individual cases, such as an individual's name if I'm going to be providing services to them, or specific best interest assessments or BIDs. So those types of information needs are going to be more if you are placed more on the right in terms of your functions. If you're more up, that's going to require broader swaths of information, but less identifiable or non-identifiable. So for oversight, we don't tend to need the names of individuals. What we need is we need to be able to look at key performance indicators, statistics, trends, these types of things that will allow us to measure the quality of programming or of implementation, and not necessarily as much information needs around the specific case needs. Now, if you're up in that upper right-hand quadrant, you're going to be needing both of those, right? You're going to need the trends and the key performance indicators to really understand the service provision that's being done, as well as that information that's necessary for case management, because you are actually providing those services. So depending upon where your specific work lands and what your engagement in case management is in a context or in an operation, this will then determine what your information needs are and how you will use specific information systems. So for example, with us as UNHCR, your needs, the way you would use V4 and for the child protection or the gender-based violence module, will depend upon this. So not everybody is going to use our digital case management systems in the same way, because our case management system is not collecting the same information, because we're not necessarily always doing the same provision or procedures in different contexts. So to give this a little bit more concretely before we finish up, is so if you were providing direct service provision in a refugee context, then what you would do is that this is going to fall up in this upper right-hand quadrant like we're talking about. This is a pretty straightforward example. Direct service provision requires us to directly engage with those survivors or those children and requires us to then have both that quantitative trends data, so de-identified, as well as information around the cases that we are specifically responsible for. If we are doing something like protection monitoring in a refugee context, this is not going to be in the upper. This is probably going to be more down in the middle because we're not really as accountable for the quality of service provision because we're not really providing or overseeing case management service provision. But we are engaging directly then with the community and with these. So there is some proximity, but not direct engagement with specific cases. So for protection monitoring in refugee context, the types of information you might need will be more de-identified trends and less about the identifiable case management information. If we are in a context, we are actually providing oversight, or actually usually it looks a bit more like supervision of low capacity partners in a refugee context. What this might require is instead of us just having to do oversight, we might actually be providing that case management supervision, helping that partner learn how to do case management. And in a case like this, then this requires more access to information, case management information, because we're going to need to be able to help them to ensure the quality of that programming. So this is going to go a little bit closer up into that right upper quadrant, right? Because you're going to need to be able to see some of that case management information to be able to provide them support on how to ensure that quality, to measure the key performance indicators. Now, if we were talking about a partner, though, that is a high capacity, either in that location or internally within their organization, they have the ability to support themselves, the internal structures to support themselves to ensure the capacity and the quality of their programming, then we won't need to have as much oversight or insight into their specific cases unless we are directly involved in it. And so for just simple oversight of a high capacity implementing partner, that's going to be moved more over to the left. So more at trends. So we can do more monitoring, key performance indicators. We can do more just trends analysis instead of really having to see more of that identifiable case information. Because again, we're not really providing that supervision role. We're really doing more of just general oversight. So in a context where we're doing then the resettlement service provision, so this is going to be really far right on that proximity, right? Because we're going to be doing that direct service provision. But again, there's not going to be a high level of accountability for the overall quality of gender-based violence or child protection case management. This is going to be very much specific to the accountability for that specific case. So this case will be further to the right, or this example, but it would be lower in terms of that accountability because really what we're looking at is that specific case, not overall programming. And so in terms of that, you would need more identifiable case management information. So let's say for that specific case, maybe you're going to need that best interest assessment or a best interest determination, but you wouldn't need that for all cases, right? Or you wouldn't need the overall trends because what's going to be important to you is really more specific for those cases. And then finally, if we were in a context where you have a high capacity operational partner in a non-refugee context and you're doing oversight as part of like coordination, so let's say you're the co-lead in a coordination group, that's also going to go far to the left and far to the end, to the bottom, because again, you do need some basic trends to understand what is going on, who's walking indoors, that sort of thing. But you really aren't going to be involved in the accountability of the quality of their programming because A, they have high capacity, and B, they're not an implementing partner. And also, we aren't going to be directly engaging within their cases unless somebody was referred to us. And in that case, that moves up to more of that direct service provision. So for cases that we aren't directly involved in, there wouldn't be any need for that in-depth case management information. So that's why something like this would go further to the left. So what's important for us to think about is as we think about our information needs and our case management programming, it's important for us to separate our refugee case management versus our gender-based violence case management and child protection best interest procedures. And when we think about our roles across these different things, we need to think about what is our engagement in these different roles, because it's not the same across. We're not a monolith as UNHCR. We have different responsibilities within our agency, and so we need to think about what are the roles of our different parts when we engage in both refugee case management and gender-based violence case management and child protection best interest procedures. Thank you very much.